in a time when it feels less safe to be online, let's talk about how you can protect yourself online. I'm Elliot Apple, founder and financial planner of Kindness Financial Planning, and let's talk about cybersecurity today, because the protection of your accounts and your identity are really important in today's world. So let's dive into how you can protect yourself online. The first step that you can take is to actually use passwords on your devices. And I know that may seem like a strange thing to say, but I've met a lot of people who don't put a password on their phone or don't lock their laptop. So it's as simple as someone swiping that object, and now they might have access to your email, to your banking information, a whole host of things that you store on your phone that is probably unsecure. So you want to make sure that you're locking up those devices with a good password. Also with devices, make sure that you're updating your software. I've met many people where they'll show me their computer screen and an update will come up and they'll just click ignore. And it will be months potentially before they actually update that software. And it could be a really important security patch that needs to be installed to help protect your device, whether that's your phone, your laptop. So instead of just hitting ignore or clicking ignore time and time again, make sure that you are updating that software. Also, when it comes to passwords, don't reuse passwords. This is probably the number one thing I see people do, and it makes me cringe every time. Now, I know in the past this was an okay thing that people did, or they do some variation, but in today's world, so many things have been hacked that your password is likely out there. And the difficulty with that is if you put your password for your banking institution and for the small website that was really easy to get hacked, they're going to get that list of the small website that's been hacked, and they're likely going to go to other organizations and try that password out. Now, if you're reusing that password or using some variation of that, they can comb through those lists and put that on that other website to potentially get in. And so if you're reusing passwords, that's a really easy way for hackers to get into an account. So even if you think this institution has a really secure structure to them, it might not be. You might be the weak link here, and that you're reusing passwords, making it really easy for people to get into other sources of your privacy. One question comes up quite frequently of how do I manage all these different passwords? Let's say I have 100 different accounts out there. How do I possibly remember 100 different passwords? This is where a password manager or a password vault can come in handy. There are many different types out there. I'm not going to provide a recommendation to one specifically, but I will say that this is an easy way to automatically generate a password. It can be anywhere from, maybe 10 characters out to 30 or 60 characters. It can be complex with different uppercase, lowercase symbols, numbers, lots of different complexity in there. And then it can be stored in that, and you just need a master password to get into that. Now, some security experts will say, okay, well, you have one master password that gets into that. That is a security risk potentially, particularly if it's being stored on the cloud. What if that institution could be hacked? Well, then you could store that password manager locally if you wanted to. There's lots of different ways to set this up. I'd say a lot of people are okay probably with this cloud system, and it's a step in the right direction as opposed to just using the same password over and over again or some variation of it. And if you're going back and you're thinking about changing passwords, I would start with things like your email or your banking institution, critical systems, maybe your wireless carrier, critical systems that can be used to get into other systems. I mentioned email just because most websites have a forgot password button, and when you click on that, where does it go? It goes to your email. And so if you have a weak password for your email, someone goes and resets your password for, say, your banking institution, your email could be the weak link there where they're able to get into that email, reset it, and now you're locked out of your email and your banking institution potentially. So as you go back and you think about which passwords to change, I'd start with the high priority list first and then work your way down to everything else. Another tip that I see people not do too often is set up a verbal password. In today's world, most of our information is out there, whether that's your social security number, your date of birth, where you grew up. Most of that stuff can be found online due to the hacks that have happened. So when you call your financial institution, perhaps see if you can set up a verbal password on your account. And when you think about the verbal password, don't make this your pet's name or your spouse's name, something really easy. Find a truly random word that you have out there and think about applying that to your account. But do be careful of remembering this one. I know some financial institutions, you have to go in person, present two forms of identification, and go through this rigorous process to get back into the account if you do ever forget your verbal password. But this can be another layer of truly picking a random word. So if someone were to call in and they don't know that random word, hopefully the representative is not going to provide access to the account. We focused a lot on passwords, and that is an important thing, but there's also usually two keys to logging in. There's a username or email address and a password. And if you reuse the same email address or same username for every website, you're essentially handing over one key to the hackers that they already know. Because most likely your email address is either public, or if you used your username through lots of different systems, that's likely been hacked. So one thing that you can consider doing is doing random usernames or random email addresses, and there's different ways to do this out there. If you don't want to do separate email addresses, you could pick random usernames if they allow that. It depends on, we're trying to balance privacy, but also ease of use. So this isn't necessarily a recommendation for you to go do this. All these are just ideas and educational for you, but this is one structure that you could set up to help secure that second part of the equation, is using a random username. So you're not just using the same one, say on this website and this website and this website gets hacked, and now they have half the key to all those other different websites. Similar to the password, some things are more critical than others. So if you're using the same username for, say, your wireless carrier as other websites, that might be one to start with, just because that can use two-factor authentication to get into systems. Same thing for bank accounts or investment accounts, other financial institutions. I would start with those higher priority websites and then work my way back to other websites. But more importantly, use this going forward. A little bit more detail about the separate email addresses. Security experts have different recommendations along this line, but one way to still balance ease of use but also security is to use more of a private email address for things like your banking and your financial institutions that you don't give out anywhere else, and then use another one for public, for online websites or friends you communicate with, something like that, where the private one is not easily discoverable and you're really using that to lock down. But you want to make sure that you are checking that regularly, because if it is for your financial institution and you're getting alerts for trade transfer or trade confirmations with trading inside the account or money movement, you want to make sure you're checking that regularly. That way, if something does happen, you are on top of it. This can also be helpful because if you get a phishing attempt for some sort of purchase to that personal email address, and you know you don't use that for any sort of transactions that way, say with your bank, you know it's going to be phishing. It's another layer to say, oh, red flag, I don't use that email address for any financial transactions. I shouldn't be getting an email about any sort of purchase. I can ignore that. Now, you typically should be hovering over links, not clicking on links in the email, making sure that you're logging in through a separate website instead of clicking those login links in emails. So that's just another layer of protection when you're looking through that, but it should be a red flag alert if you were to get something to that personal email. Along with passwords and a verbal password, think about using two-factor authentication. And I know it's a pain to use. I'm not a big fan of using it either, but it is another security layer. And when allowable, I'd say shy away from the SMS or text messaging two-factor authentication, just because those are unencrypted. So when those are sent to you, those can actually be hacked. That is not a super secure form of two-factor authentication. A more secure form would be little key cards that you can get, and or using an authenticator app on your phone. That could be another resource, but it does mean that your phone needs to be more secure and have backup protection on it. So I'd encourage you to look at some of those authenticator apps instead of that two-factor authentication with text messaging as another layer where you have your username, your password, and then that two-factor authentication. You're just trying to provide more safeguards that if someone were to find out that password or that username, two-factor authentication will hopefully prevent them from accessing the account. Not having to do with passwords, but having to put up more safeguards is a credit freeze. I think this is something that everybody should do. I've yet to find someone where I don't think that this is applicable, just because if you look at historical data breaches, including one at a credit bureau, most of our information, I operate from the assumption, is out there, including our social security numbers. So if a fraudster wants to go out and open credit in my name, and I have a credit freeze set up, I'm essentially telling the credit bureau, don't release that information to anybody who's accessing that file. So if they were to apply for credit in my name, it should just shut it down. They're going to go make that request to the credit bureau. The credit bureau is going to go, oops, sorry, credit freeze, we can't provide that information. And that should hopefully stop the loan application, whether that's a credit card, car loan, or any other form of debt that someone's trying to take out in my name. Now, you may be thinking, well, what if I'm trying to apply for credit in my own name? It's super simple to do a thaw or unfreeze your credit, and you can even do it temporarily. So I've gotten to the point where once I have my login set up for these accounts, I can get in within about 5 minutes and temporarily unfreeze all of them for a day or whatever the time frame is I'm trying to do. and then thaw that so that way they can pull the credit and then it automatically refreezes. So this is a really important safeguard that I'd recommend people do. Help your parents with this, grandparents. Most people's credits should be locked down. Even if you have fraud alerts or other things set up, I like to equate it to a house. We can either put a lock on the door or we can put an alarm system on. We can put the alarm system on and not lock the door, and the alarm will go off, but it might be too late by the time they get it. We put the lock on the door, it's one more layer of security for you. When it comes to public places, just avoid public Wi-Fi. That's my general recommendation there. If you do need to access it, consider using a virtual private network or VPN as another layer of security. My preferred method though is to just hotspot off my phone. So I can click on the hotspot, make that mobile device my hotspot, and then connect my laptop or whatever else it is to it. I find that that's a safer and more secure method than connecting to public Wi-Fi. Next, be cautious about the personal information that you're sharing online. Your pet, your favorite name, where you grew up, those sort of things. If we think about the security questions that are commonly asked, a lot of that information is publicly available, particularly if you have open social media profiles like on Facebook. That's not hard for a hacker to go in and go, oh, that person's favorite pet is there, they grew up here. All that information is right there for the taking. So consider locking down those social media profiles and being cautious about what you share online, because that information could come back to bite you. If you do have a mobile device, whether that's Apple or Android, consider setting up anti-theft protection. Apple has their own version, Google has their other, where you can either automatically lock the screen if it detects certain things using AI, or you can remote wipe it. Just making sure that you have a way to access that device from another device if it gets stolen, so that way you can lock it down, or just delete all the contents entirely. When it comes to financial institutions, consider adding a trusted contact. This is something that financial institutions have made more of a push for recently, particularly with cognitive impairment, where they may be concerned about certain transactions or someone's being financially abused or there's fraud going on. You can name someone so that financial institution can reach out to a loved one or someone that you name to say, hey, we suspect this is going on and we can't get in touch with them. Can you help us locate them? It's not foolproof, but again, we're just trying to put up more layers of protections and safeguards in place so that if something does happen, we can catch it sooner. And then finally, just be aware of what the latest scams are. I mentioned this just because I was reading an FBI report recently. Romance or love scams have been on the rise, and that's important to keep in mind because as we share information online, it's really easy for someone in a totally different location to be out there trying to make a connection with you, probably not who they say they are, and trying to gain access to your accounts. And it might be small transactions at first. Hey, I need $20 for my medications this week. Oh, I need $100 for this the next week. And they just slowly pull more and more money away from people. And really intelligent, really smart people will fall for these traps. So being up to date on what those look like and key signs and making sure that your loved ones around you are also aware from that to help protect them. This is not a foolproof list of ways to protect yourself online, but these tips should help you get started to put up more layers of protection for yourself. That way you're protecting yourself online, whether that's financial accounts, your personal information, and your loved ones out there. Hopefully you found something that you're going to implement in your own life. Feel free to comment down below. What are you going to implement and what did you find the most helpful? Thanks for watching.